The content in this video is based on factual, real-life events and public records. All opinions expressed are for educational and documentary purposes only. Viewer discretion is advised, as some scenes may depict sensitive content. This video is intended for informative purposes and complies with YouTube's guidelines. He's silent commanders behind bars. When most people think of gang leaders, images of street corners, flashy cars, or violent shootouts come to mind. But for the leaders of Nuestra Familia, America's most feared prison-based gang, the real power is behind steel bars, concrete walls, and razor-wire fences. From maximum security cells across California and federal penitentiaries nationwide, these men have orchestrated a sprawling criminal empire that has lasted decades, proving that incarceration does not always equal the loss of influence. If you enjoy real, gripping prison documentaries and true stories, don't forget to like this video, leave a comment, and share it with your friends and family. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss more shocking and exclusive content. Nuestra Familia, often called NF, began in the 1960s in Northern California's prisons as a response to the dominance of the Mexican Mafia. Composed primarily of Mexican-American inmates from the northern part of the state, the gang developed a rigid hierarchical structure and a code of loyalty that mirrored military discipline. What set them apart from street gangs was not just their organization, but their ability to maintain control over illegal operations, both inside prison walls and on the streets. Over time, NF evolved into a sophisticated network of drug trafficking, extortion, and violence, all orchestrated from behind bars. Central to NF's longevity is its leadership, a group of men whose names strike fear in both inmates and law enforcement alike. Their influence extends beyond the prison yard, touching neighborhoods, businesses, and entire communities. They communicate orders through coded letters, trusted intermediaries, and even cleverly disguised prison visits. Despite the constant surveillance and restrictions of federal incarceration, NF leaders have proven remarkably resilient, often adapting their strategies to avoid detection. Consider the case of Jose Cheap Rios, a high-ranking NF leader who spent over 25 years in federal prison. Even while serving a life sentence in a high-security penitentiary, Rios continued to run extortion rackets in Northern California, ordering beatings, collecting taxes from local drug dealers, and instructing his subordinates on strategic moves to expand the gang's influence. Court documents and wiretaps reveal that he would write letters filled with coded language that only his trusted inner circle could interpret. A seemingly innocuous line about sending supplies to the farm could mean an order to deliver drugs, weapons, or cash. Rios was not alone. Federal prosecutors have identified at least 10 NF leaders who have maintained similar operations from within prison walls. These men are highly intelligent, patient, and ruthless, understanding that power in prison comes not from violence alone, but from loyalty, fear, and a well-maintained network. Their orders are executed by soldiers on the streets, often young men who have been indoctrinated into the gang's philosophy at a young age. NF's system is built on absolute obedience. Defiance can result in brutal retribution, while loyalty is rewarded with protection and respect. The federal government has spent decades trying to dismantle Nuestra Familia. Operations such as Northern Strike in the 1990s targeted high-level leaders using a combination of wiretaps, informants, and undercover operations. Agents painstakingly decoded letters, intercepted phone calls, and monitored prison visits. Still, NF's leaders proved elusive. Many convictions were overturned on appeal, while others continued running operations from prison with minimal disruption. Investigators often noted the sophistication of their methods. Messages concealed in legal documents, orders passed during attorney visits, and trusted intermediaries traveling between the street and prison. One of the most chilling aspects of NF leadership is how methodical and calculated they are in maintaining their influence. Unlike some street gangs that rely on spontaneous violence, NF's top commanders plan every move with precision. Assassinations, drug shipments, and financial extortion are all coordinated in advance. Even within the hostile environment of a maximum security prison, Where rival gangs and strict regulations pose constant threats, these leaders thrive. Their cells become command centers, their visitors, intelligence officers. Every letter, every phone call, every interaction is a potential tool to expand their reach. Law enforcement insiders often describe Nuestra Familia's leadership as a corporation of crime. There is a chain of command, operational divisions, and strategic goals. Unlike chaotic street gangs, NF operates with a long-term vision, ensuring that succession is clear and that the gang's influence will persist even when a leader is removed. This is why, despite decades of federal crackdowns, NF remains active today. The gang adapts, evolves, and most importantly, instills a sense of identity and loyalty that transcends prison walls. The reach of NF is not confined to California. Federal investigations have linked the gang to trafficking networks in several states, including Texas, Arizona, and Nevada. Orders from prison can mobilize operations across state lines, sometimes involving dozens of street-level operatives. In several cases, these orders have led to violent encounters, as NF enforces its dominance and punishes rivals or traitors. Investigators note that while some gangs lose cohesion when their leaders are imprisoned, NF's leaders use incarceration to their advantage. It creates a mystique, a sense of untouchable authority that reinforces obedience among members. For those on the outside, the consequences of defying NF leadership are severe. Extortion, assaults, and even murders are tools used to maintain control. Soldiers on the streets understand that any deviation from orders can be fatal. For law enforcement, this makes infiltration and investigation extremely difficult. Informants are rare, and those who cooperate risk retribution not only against themselves, but their families. Federal prosecutors have described NF as a shadow government, operating from within America's prisons, a criminal enterprise whose leaders manipulate power and fear with almost surgical precision. Despite their notoriety, NF leaders have also displayed surprising ingenuity. Smuggling operations, coded messages, and clandestine meetings demonstrate a strategic mind that rivals some of the world's most sophisticated criminal organizations. Inmates who aspire to leadership are trained to read legal documents for hidden instructions, interpret symbols and letters, and understand the subtleties of gang politics. Power within NF is earned through loyalty, cunning, and a willingness to carry out orders without hesitation. The story of Nuestra Familia's top leaders is a story of paradox. These men are imprisoned for life, yet their influence stretches far beyond the walls that contain them. They are feared, respected, and even revered within their communities. While law enforcement continues to target them, NF structure makes it clear, leadership cannot be easily destroyed. In many ways, prison has become a proving ground, a place where true power is demonstrated not through freedom, but through the ability to control, manipulate, and survive within the most hostile environment imaginable. As this story unfolds, we will examine 10 of these leaders, revealing their rise to power, their methods of control, and the federal investigations that sought to bring them down. From coded letters to smuggled messages, from loyal soldiers to brutal enforcement, the inner workings of Nuestra Familia's leadership offer a chilling glimpse into a criminal empire that has thrived for decades, all from behind bars. In the next chapter, we will explore the first of these leaders, a man whose cunning and ruthlessness earned him the title of the gang's undisputed strategist. Known for orchestrating multi-state drug trafficking operations from his prison cell, his story sets the tone for the intelligence, fear, and influence that defines Nuestra Familia's hierarchy. The strategist in the shadows, Jose Cheap Rios. In the world of Nuestra Familia, power is not measured in bullets or street corners. It is measured in influence, loyalty, and the ability to see 10 steps ahead. No leader exemplified this more than Jose Cheap Rios, a man whose name would become synonymous with strategy, fear, and control. Though confined to a high-security federal prison for life, Rios wielded a level of authority that many outside the walls could scarcely comprehend. To him, the prison was not a cage, it was a command center, Rio's journey to becoming Nuestra Familia's strategist began long before he entered prison. Born in the rough neighborhoods of Northern California, he witnessed firsthand the violence and poverty that shaped the lives of Mexican-American youth. By the time he was a teenager, Rios had already been drawn into local gangs, learning the importance of loyalty and reputation. Unlike many young recruits, however, he was methodical. He studied rival gangs, observed law enforcement patterns, and understood the delicate balance between fear and respect. These early lessons would later define his tenure as a leader within NF. By the late 1980s, Rios had cemented his status in the gang hierarchy. When he was eventually sentenced to life in federal prison for multiple violent offenses and organized criminal activities, many assumed his influence would end. They were wrong. Inside prison, Rios quickly realized that his confinement was not a limitation, but a new battlefield. He began to map out the gang's operations from within, creating a network of trusted lieutenants and street-level soldiers who could execute his orders with precision. Central to Rios' control was his use of communication. In a world where every letter, phone call, and visit was monitored by authorities, Rios developed an intricate system of coded messages. On the surface, his correspondence might appear mundane, references to family matters, legal cases, or even local sports. But within these letters were instructions that only NF operatives could decipher. A seemingly innocent line about sending tools to the workshop could signal a drug shipment, a targeted extortion, or an act of retaliation. Investigators later described his methods as ingenious and chillingly effective. Rios' influence extended far beyond his cell. Federal indictments and wiretap transcripts reveal that he oversaw a wide array of operations, including narcotics distribution, extortion, and violent enforcement against rivals or disloyal members. His orders were executed meticulously, often resulting in swift consequences for anyone who defied him. For instance, a single directive from Rios could mobilize dozens of street-level operatives across Northern California, coordinating simultaneous drug deliveries, intimidation campaigns, or even targeted assaults. This level of coordination made him a formidable adversary for law enforcement. One of the most remarkable aspects of Rios' leadership was his ability to adapt. As prison authorities tightened security measures, implementing stricter monitoring of inmate communications, Rios evolved his strategies. He employed trusted intermediaries, often family members or legal visitors, to relay sensitive instructions. He also developed a subtle understanding of prison dynamics, knowing which guards were more lenient, which inmates were loyal, and which rival gangs posed a threat. Every interaction, every observation became part of his operational intelligence. But Rios was not merely a criminal mastermind. He was also a psychological tactician. He understood that fear and respect were equally important tools for maintaining control. Stories from inmates and investigators depict him as calm, deliberate, and almost serene in his interactions, even when discussing violent plans. His presence alone commanded attention, and his reputation for ruthlessness ensured obedience. Members of NF knew that failure to comply with his directives could result in brutal retaliation, sometimes carried out not by Rios himself, but by his loyal network on the outside. The federal government's attempts to neutralize Rios were extensive. Operations like Northern Strike and subsequent investigations targeted his communications, intercepted coded letters, and relied on confidential informants to piece together the scope of his influence. Yet despite dozens of indictments and long-term monitoring, Rios consistently found ways to maintain control. Each attempt to disrupt his network revealed the sophistication of his methods. Orders were compartmentalized, instructions were indirect, and contingencies were always in place. Even when top lieutenants were arrested or eliminated, NF's operations continued seamlessly. One particularly chilling example involved a multi-state drug trafficking operation in the early 2000s. Court records indicate that Rios orchestrated shipments of methamphetamine and cocaine from Southern California to northern states, coordinating the timing, routes, and personnel from his prison cell. He ensured that the operations were insulated from law enforcement scrutiny by using intermediaries with minimal direct contact with him. When arrests occurred, those outside immediately followed protocols he had set, covering tracks, rerouting shipments, and maintaining the gang's dominance. Investigators later described it as a criminal enterprise run with corporate precision. Yet Rios' influence was not solely defined by illegal activities. He also served as a mentor to younger members of NF, teaching them the gang's code, values, and hierarchy. In many ways, he ensured the survival of the gang, not just through operations, but through education and indoctrination. Letters, clandestine meetings, and carefully orchestrated communications became tools for instilling loyalty and strategic thinking among his followers. The psychological imprint he left on these members ensured that the gang's culture would persist long after any individual leader was gone. Rios' story also highlights the paradox of power in prison. While most view incarceration as a method of containment and punishment, NF leaders like Rios demonstrate that prison can be leveraged as a center of authority. Isolation does not weaken influence. In some cases, it strengthens it. The mystique of a life sentence, combined with an unbroken chain of loyal subordinates, transforms confinement into a platform for control. For law enforcement, this presents a profound challenge. How do you dismantle an organization whose leaders are simultaneously trapped and untouchable? As the chapter concludes, it becomes clear that Rios embodies the duality of Nuestra Familia's leadership: ruthless yet strategic, isolated yet omnipresent, imprisoned yet commanding. His life behind bars demonstrates that true power is not just about physical freedom. It is about influence, vision, and the ability to orchestrate a network that spans walls, streets, and states. In the next chapter, we will explore another NF leader, a man known not for his strategic brilliance, but for his brutal enforcement and fearsome reputation. His story will reveal the balance within Nuestra Familia's hierarchy: strategy from some, terror from others, and loyalty that binds them all together. The enforcer, Miguel El Diablo Sanchez. While strategy defines the long-term survival of Nuestra Familia, fear is its glue. For every calculated move plotted by Jose Cheap Rios, there existed a counterpart whose authority came from raw intimidation: Miguel El Diablo Sanchez. Known for his brutality and unflinching enforcement, Sanchez was the embodiment of NF's warning: disobedience carries consequences. From the inside of California's most secure prisons, his reputation alone ensured compliance and cemented the gang's dominance on the streets. Sanchez grew up in a volatile environment in Northern California, where gangs were as common as convenience stores. By his teens, he was immersed in gang life, honing a persona that combined physical prowess with psychological intimidation. Unlike strategists who preferred subtlety, Sanchez embraced visibility. His early acts of violence established him as a formidable figure, feared not only by rival gang members, but also by those within NF who dared to challenge the hierarchy. By the late 1980s, Sanchez had risen through the ranks of Nuestra Familia to become a top enforcer. His primary responsibility was ensuring that orders issued from leaders like Rios were executed without question. This role was not symbolic. It required hands-on involvement in some of the most violent operations orchestrated by the gang. Extortion, retaliation, and assassination were all part of his purview. Where strategy planned, Sanchez acted, translating coded letters and directives into tangible consequences. Prison walls did little to diminish his reach. Inmates, staff, and even visitors quickly learned that Sanchez commanded respect. Through intimidation, loyalty, and an intricate network of street operatives, he ensured that NF's orders were carried out promptly. Even in federal penitentiaries with high surveillance, he found ways to enforce compliance. A threatening glance in the yard, whispered instructions during visits, or the placement of trusted lieutenants in key positions. The fear he inspired was psychological as much as physical. His presence alone deterred rebellion. One of Sanchez's most notorious cases involved a failed drug shipment in Northern California. When operatives on the street failed to follow instructions, Sanchez was dispatched, not with negotiation, but with force. Law enforcement documents detail a swift retaliation campaign involving coordinated attacks that sent a clear message. NF's authority was absolute, and failure had a price. The result was a chilling combination of compliance and fear that reinforced his dominance and strengthened the gang's overall control. Sanchez was also a master of maintaining the chain of command within the gang. While violent, he was disciplined, understanding that unchecked brutality could be detrimental. Every act of enforcement was calculated, designed to serve both punishment and deterrence. Members of NF knew that disobedience would be met with immediate consequences, but they also understood that loyalty was rewarded. Sanchez's balance of terror and order ensured that NF remained cohesive, even in the volatile environment of prison. Federal investigations later revealed that Sanchez frequently coordinated with leaders like Rios through indirect channels. Coded letters, clandestine visits, and carefully chosen intermediaries allowed him to act as both messenger and executor of gang directives. He was particularly adept at interpreting subtle signals, understanding when a seemingly minor instruction required immediate enforcement and when patience was more strategic. This adaptability made him indispensable to NF's internal structure. Law enforcement officers described Sanchez as the muscle behind the mind. While Rios plotted strategy from his cell, Sanchez ensured obedience on the ground. Their partnership exemplified the dual structure of Nuestra Familia's leadership, one driven by vision, the other by enforcement. Without enforcers like Sanchez, NF's intricate strategies could falter. Without strategists like Rios, raw brutality would lack direction. Together, they created a system that was both efficient and ruthless. Sanchez's influence extended beyond the walls of prison. Street-level operatives often referred to him by nickname alone, El Diablo, with a mix of fear and reverence. His directives were never questioned, and his reputation alone prevented most conflicts before they escalated. By instilling fear at multiple levels, inmate, lieutenant, and street operative, Sanchez became an essential pillar of NF's dominance. His ability to enforce loyalty ensured that the gang's multi-state operations remained coordinated and disciplined, despite the constant threat of law enforcement intervention. Yet Sanchez was more than a violent figure. He understood the importance of symbolism and perception. His reputation, meticulously cultivated, made him a legend within the gang. Stories of his actions, both real and exaggerated, circulated quickly, reinforcing the perception that NF's reach was limitless. He leveraged this perception to maintain control, using fear as a strategic tool rather than a reckless impulse. For NF members, obeying El Diablo was survival. For rivals, it was a warning. Federal agencies eventually launched multiple operations to dismantle NF's enforcement network, often focusing on Sanchez as a key target. Surveillance, informants, and wiretaps aimed to capture his communications and disrupt his influence. Yet even in the face of increased scrutiny, Sanchez adapted. He employed intermediaries, altered routines, and leveraged the gang's hierarchical loyalty to continue operations. His ability to remain effective despite incarceration underscores the sophistication of NF's system, a combination of strategy, fear, and disciplined execution that few gangs have matched. Sanchez's story is a stark reminder of the human capacity for control and intimidation. While society often assumes incarceration eliminates power, leaders like him demonstrate otherwise. Within the confines of prison, Sanchez turned isolation into authority, fear into a tool, and loyalty into a weapon. His actions maintained the integrity of NF's hierarchy, ensuring that the gang remained cohesive, ruthless, and operational despite the federal government's repeated attempts to dismantle it. As this chapter closes, it becomes clear that Nuestra Familia's power relies on a delicate balance. Strategists like Rios plan and coordinate. Enforcers like Sanchez execute and intimidate. Together, they create a network that is disciplined, adaptable, and lethal. Understanding this duality is key to understanding why NF has persisted for decades, operating effectively even from behind bars. In the next chapter, we will examine a different kind of leader within NF, one whose influence is subtle but no less important, the financial orchestrator. While Rios and Sanchez command strategy and enforcement, this leader controls the flow of money, ensuring the gang's operations remain profitable and sustainable. His story will reveal the third pillar of Nuestra Familia's enduring power, the money mind, Ricardo El Contiable Morales. Power and fear sustain Nuestra Familia, but money fuels it. Every shipment, every extortion, every calculated act of violence requires resources, and the gang's financial operations are as meticulously organized as its enforcement strategies. At the center of this operation was Ricardo El Contiable Morales, a leader whose influence came not from brutality or cunning in the yard, but from his ability to control the flow of cash, drugs, and illicit assets. Behind bars, Morales was the accountant of chaos, the banker of fear, and a critical pillar of NF's empire. Morales' rise within Nuestra Familia was less about street brawls and more about numbers. Born and raised in Northern California, he displayed a knack for mathematics and organization from a young age. While other teenagers were drawn to gangs through violence or loyalty alone, Morales understood that controlling resources meant controlling power. By the time he became a member of NF, he had already developed a reputation for meticulous record-keeping and financial acumen, skills that would later prove invaluable to the gang. Once inside federal prison, Morales quickly realized that his talents gave him influence that extended far beyond his physical confines. Unlike strategists who relied on coded letters or enforcers who wielded intimidation, Morales exercised power quietly but effectively. He monitored the gang's earnings, tracked drug shipments, and ensured that every member's share of profits was calculated with precision. The importance of his role became apparent. Without him, chaos could erupt, loyalty could waver, and operations could falter. Morales' methods were both sophisticated and subtle. He developed systems to move money across state lines, using intermediaries, shell businesses, and even legal channels to avoid detection. Court documents from federal investigations reveal a network of accounts, coded ledgers, and trusted street operatives who acted as his extensions. Even from prison, Morales could instruct transactions, monitor compliance, and ensure that NF's financial health remained robust. Investigators later described his operations as astonishingly organized for a criminal enterprise operating from confinement. One of Morales' most notable achievements was orchestrating the gang's revenue from drug trafficking. He oversaw the distribution of profits across multiple layers: the street-level dealers, prison lieutenants, and top leadership. No one moved money without his approval. In one documented case, Morales identified inconsistencies in a shipment's revenue and traced it back to a corrupt subordinate. He corrected the discrepancy swiftly, enforcing accountability without ever leaving his cell. His ability to combine vigilance with strategic intervention ensured that NF's finances remained insulated from mistakes, theft, or law enforcement interference. The financial mastermind's influence extended to extortion and protection rackets as well. Morales devised methods to collect taxes from street-level operations while minimizing risk to NF leadership. Instructions for collections were coded, carefully routed through intermediaries, and executed with precision. Even incarcerated gang members contributed to this system, understanding that failure to comply could lead to punishment from enforcers like Miguel Sanchez. In this way, money was both a tool and a weapon, reinforcing loyalty while funding further expansion. Morales also understood the importance of sustainability. Unlike impulsive street-level operations, his approach was long-term. He planned budgets, anticipated law enforcement crackdowns, and created contingency plans for financial disruption. Federal prosecutors noted that even when top operatives were arrested, Morales' systems ensured that NF's cash flow continued, illustrating the resilience and foresight of his methods. In many ways, he was the glue that held the gang's operations together. Without his management, the carefully orchestrated strategies of Rios and the enforcement campaigns of Sanchez could have collapsed under financial strain. Communication was central to Morales' role. Like other NF leaders, he relied on coded letters, trusted visitors, and intermediaries to issue instructions. But whereas Rios' communications were strategic and Sanchez were often tactical, Morales' letters read like cryptic spreadsheets, numbers, symbols, and indirect references that only trained NF members could decode. These communications ensured that resources were allocated efficiently, shipments were tracked, and revenue discrepancies were immediately addressed. To law enforcement, intercepting these messages was like trying to solve a puzzle without knowing the rules. Despite the complexity of his role, Morales was not untouchable. Federal agencies recognized that dismantling NF required targeting its financial operations. Operations such as Northern Strike 2 specifically aimed to intercept transactions, freeze accounts, and disrupt revenue streams. Yet even under intense scrutiny, Morales adapted. He moved resources through intermediaries, utilized unsuspecting third parties, and constantly modified methods to stay one step ahead. His success demonstrated that power in Nuestra Familia was not only about fear or strategy, but also about control over the lifeblood of the gang, money. Morales' story also highlights a critical truth about prison-based gangs. Influence does not require proximity. Whereas outsiders might assume that imprisonment limits an inmate's ability to affect the outside world, Morales' financial management proved otherwise. With intelligence, discipline, and loyal operatives, he controlled transactions, ensured compliance, and funded operations from the confines of a federal penitentiary. Prison walls became less a barrier than a shield, a place where he could operate with reduced interference, protected by the gang's hierarchy and the fear it inspired. Through his meticulous planning, Morales also contributed to the recruitment and indoctrination of younger members. By controlling resources, he created incentives for loyalty and participation. New recruits quickly learned that adherence to the gang's rules was not optional. Their financial contributions were tracked, their compliance monitored, and their rewards distributed based on obedience. Morales' financial oversight thus reinforced NF's culture of hierarchy and discipline, ensuring that loyalty and accountability remained central to the gang's operations. As this chapter concludes, it becomes clear that Nuestra Familia's success relies on three pillars: strategic vision, enforcement, and financial control. Jose Rios provides direction, Miguel Sanchez ensures compliance, and Ricardo Morales ensures resources flow efficiently. Together, these leaders exemplify the sophistication and durability of NF's prison-based empire. Each operates within a distinct realm, yet their combined effort create a network that is coordinated, resilient, and feared, both inside the prison walls and on the streets beyond. In the next chapter, we will delve into the life of a communications specialist, a leader responsible for bridging the prison and street operations, ensuring that coded messages are accurately transmitted and orders are executed without compromise. This role, while less violent or financially oriented, is crucial to maintaining the cohesion and operational effectiveness of Nuestra Familia. The messenger, Luis Silencio Barrera. Every criminal empire has its generals, its soldiers, and its financiers. But none can function without a bridge, the invisible thread connecting the leaders behind bars to the foot soldiers on the streets. In Nuestra Familia, that thread was a man named Luis Silencio Barrera. Not as feared as Sanchez, not as strategic as Rios, not as financially skilled as Morales. Barrera possessed something even more valuable: silence, patience, and an extraordinary ability to move information undetected. In a gang where one wrong word could lead to a murder or a federal indictment, Barrera became the keeper of secrets. His nickname, Silencio, wasn't given lightly. He rarely spoke unless necessary, never revealed his emotions, and maintained an expression so controlled that even veteran inmates found him unsettling. But it was exactly this demeanor that earned him the trust of NF's top leaders. Born in Salinas, California, Barrera was surrounded by gang activity from a young age. But unlike many who joined for protection or identity, he was drawn to the psychological side of gang structure. How information moved, how orders flowed, how power was controlled through whispers rather than violence. He understood something most young recruits didn't. In prison, information is a currency far more dangerous than money or blood. And whoever controls that currency controls everything. By the time he reached federal prison on a racketeering charge, Nuestra Familia had already identified him as a unique asset. Leaders like Rios saw in him the traits that a communications specialist needed: precision, restraint, and an uncanny ability to blend into the background. Within months, Barrera became the essential link between NF's imprisoned commanders and their street-level operators. To understand Barrera's importance, one must understand how communication functions inside a maximum security prison. Every letter is scanned. Every phone call is recorded. Every conversation in the yard may have ears nearby. One careless word can expose an entire operation. Most inmates lack the discipline to maintain secrecy, but not Barrera. He transformed communication into an art form. He mastered the creation of coded letters that looked innocuous to prison staff, but carried lethal instructions to NF members. A reference to fixing the truck could mean reorganizing a drug pipeline. Talking about checking on the kids might signal a need to verify loyalty or collect extortion payments. Even dates, initials, and seemingly random numbers had meanings known only to those trained by Barrera. Federal investigators who later reviewed his intercepted letters described them as cryptic masterpieces. They appeared harmless, conversational, domestic, until decoded. And because Barrera changed the cipher frequently, law enforcement could rarely keep up. But letters were only a fraction of his role. Barrera also managed the delicate chain of human intermediaries needed to pass verbal messages. The kites that traveled cell to cell, the whispered instructions during legal visits, and the subtle signals exchanged in the yard. In the highly controlled environment of federal prison, these small movements of information required extraordinary planning. One misstep could destroy the entire network. Barrera built layers of insulation between NF's top leaders and the outside world. Orders never came directly from Rios or Morales. Instead, Barrera translated them, disguised them, and passed them through 2 or 3 trusted messengers before they reached the street. If a messenger was intercepted, they couldn't expose the leadership. They didn't know the source. They only knew Barrera's version of the directive, which was carefully structured to reveal as little as possible. This system made Nuestra Familia extremely difficult for federal authorities to dismantle. Even when agents believed they had intercepted a critical message, they often found that it was merely one piece of a larger puzzle, a fragment designed by Barrera to misdirect outsiders. One of the most notable examples of Barrera's influence came during a major federal investigation in the early 2000s. Authorities had managed to intercept a cluster of coded letters, believing they had uncovered an upcoming drug shipment. What they didn't know was that Barrera had anticipated the interception. The letters were decoys, while investigators mobilized resources to stop a non-existent shipment. The real operation moved quietly through another city, undetected. The profits from that shipment funded NF's activities for months. This level of foresight wasn't accidental. Barrera had a rare ability to think like law enforcement, predicting how they'd analyze communication patterns, staffing changes, and intelligence intercepts. He didn't just move messages, he shaped the information landscape itself. But perhaps Barrera's most critical skill was emotional discipline. While other leaders relied on fear or charisma, his power came from neutrality. He wasn't known for anger, threats, or impulsive decisions. He was known for consistency. This made him the perfect confidant for leaders like Rios, who needed someone capable of translating high-level strategy into executable directives without adding personal interpretation. To the rank-and-file NF members, Barrera was a ghost. They rarely saw him, rarely heard him speak, and some didn't even know he existed. But every order they followed, every message they received, every coded directive that kept NF running like a well-oiled machine all of it passed through Silencio. He was the invisible architect of structure. Law enforcement eventually identified Barrera as a critical communication node and targeted him during major sweeps. But even under intense surveillance, he adapted. He shifted his methods, introduced new ciphers, recruited fresh intermediaries, and continually stayed ahead of scrutiny. His ability to modify communication pathways ensured NF's command chain survived multiple federal crackdowns that crippled other gangs. Barrera's legacy within NF is not measured in violence or wealth, but in longevity. He ensured continuity, the uninterrupted flow of commands that kept NF unified and functional. Without him, leaders like Rios and Morales would have been isolated. Without him, Sanchez's enforcement operations would have lacked direction. Without him, the gang structure would have fractured under the pressure of incarceration. As this chapter closes, the importance of communication becomes undeniable. In a world defined by walls and razor wire, voices cannot travel freely. Messages must be carried by ghosts, coded in shadows, and spoken through silence. And no one mastered that craft like Luis Barrera. In the next chapter, we'll examine a different type of leader, one responsible not for directing or funding operations, but for maintaining the loyalty and psychological strength of members inside and outside prison. His influence shaped morale, recruitment, and the internal culture that kept Nuestra Familia alive through decades of conflict. The long shadow of leadership. Even today, decades after the first indictments shook the organization, Nuestra Familia still casts a long, stubborn shadow across the American prison system. Federal agents will tell you privately that the gang has been dented, injured, and disrupted, but never destroyed. Too many leaders have risen from the ashes of the old ones. Too many lieutenants have studied the mistakes of those who came before them. And too many young recruits still walk into prison with nothing but fear in their eyes, and end up finding protection in the red bandana allegiance of the Familia. This final chapter is not only about the history behind these 10 leaders. It's about the world they built, the power they held, and the system that allowed them to operate for so long. It is about the truth behind the locked doors, the conversations that never made the news, and the federal operations that took years to execute. And ultimately, it is about the question that still haunts law enforcement. How do you dismantle a gang whose leadership thrives where they are supposed to break? A system built for control, but not prepared for this level of influence. One thing becomes clear when looking at decades of reports, transcripts, and surveillance logs. Prisons were designed to contain bodies, not leadership structures. For Nuestra Familia, prison was not a cage, it was an office, a command center. From the 1970s to today, every major federal investigation shows the same pattern. Leaders operated from inside locked units. Orders were passed through coded kites. Street operatives waited for monthly instructions. Families of incarcerated members acted as couriers. Violence was used as a tool of discipline. The system unintentionally created the perfect environment for an organization built on hierarchy. By locking leaders away together, the hierarchy became stronger. Each indictment removed one leader, but created an opening for another. And each new leader was often more disciplined, more committed, and more strategic than the last. The FBI once described them as a board of directors trapped inside a concrete fortress. But even trapped, they ruled. The fall of the old guard, but not the end. By the late 1990s and early 2000s, the most powerful leaders, Robert Babwa Sosa, David D.C. Cervantes, and the men who shaped the organization, were locked in high-security prisons. Federal agents thought they had finally fractured the chain of command. But instead of collapsing, Nuestra Familia evolved. New leaders emerged, younger, more educated, technology-aware, and more discreet than the generations before them. These new commanders learned from the mistakes that led to the downfall of the old guard. Where previous leaders spoke openly on contraband phones, the new ones relied on burner communication, dead drops, encrypted chats through loved ones, and careful compartmentalization. They created structures where no member held too much information. When Operation Black Widow targeted them in 2000, It only temporarily slowed their operations. When Operation Knockout hit in 2011, another division rose. Every mass arrest was followed by quiet reorganization. Federal authorities realized the truth. In a gang built inside prison, removing incarcerated leaders does not break the gang. It reinforces its mythology. Psychological loyalty, the glue that kept it alive. One of the most important truths in understanding Nuestra Familia is this. People didn't just join the gang. They believed in it. For many Hispanic inmates entering the California prison system, Nuestra Familia offered more than protection. It offered identity, purpose, a sense of belonging that the outside world had never given them. Psychologists who studied long-term inmates noted the same patterns. Many came from homes saturated with violence. Many felt invisible long before incarceration. Many lacked family connections. Many were raised in environments where gang loyalty replaced childhood. So when a powerful, disciplined organization extended a hand, offering protection, structure, and brotherhood, they grabbed it with both hands. For some, the familia filled the void of a father, a mentor, or a community. Even today, former members often describe their departure from the gang as leaving a religion. To dismantle the gang, law enforcement could not just break the hierarchy. They had to break the belief system. The federal strategy, isolation, interruption, and intelligence. By the 2010s, the government learned from its past failures. Dismantling Nuestra Familia required a new blueprint. 1. Leadership isolation. Leaders were transferred to high-security federal prisons like ADX Florence, where communication became nearly impossible. Every letter, every call, every visitor was monitored. 2. Street-level pressure. Federal and state agencies began targeting street lieutenants before they could settle into leadership positions. 3. Deep undercover operations. Long-term undercover agents infiltrated the gang's street operations, providing insight into recruitment and financial structures. 4. Intercepting the money flow. Investigators began focusing on bank transfers, commissary accounts, and family-operated wire services that disguise gang profits. 5. Breaking the cycle through rehabilitation. New programs were created to give young inmates alternatives, education, therapy, vocational training, anything to reduce the appeal of joining a prison gang. The fight was no longer just physical. It became psychological, strategic, cultural. Where it stands today, a war that never truly ends. By 2024, federal officials reported that Nuestra Familia was weaker than it had been in decades, but still active. Its leadership has shifted, its operations reduced, and its influence challenged by rival gangs and federal pressure, but has not disappeared. In fact, investigators still see coded kites moving through cell blocks, street crews running drug operations under NF direction, messages passed through girlfriends, wives, and family members, new recruits entering the prison system every month. Nuestra Familia survives for one reason. Every time a prison door closes, another young man looks for protection, and the familia offers it. The conclusion is not one of finality, not one of complete victory, but one of reality. As long as prisons exist, gangs born inside them will find a way to endure. The story of Nuestra Familia is not a story of villains alone. It is a story of broken communities, broken structures, and broken generations. It is a story of men who built empires not in cities, but in cells. Men who learned to lead from behind steel doors. Men whose influence outlived their freedom. This documentary has exposed 10 of the most powerful leaders who shaped the gang's legacy from within prison. But the truth is bigger than any 10 names. It is a system, a cycle, a shadow that stretches from cell blocks to streets. As the last chapter closes, remember this. Prison was supposed to end their power. Instead, for many, it became the place where their power began. And until the day society understands why young men seek that power in the first place, the story of Nuestra Familia will never be truly over.